South Carolina, late 1980. The moonshine operation had run without incident for 3 years. Deep in the heart of Scape Ore Swamp, our crew moved through the waterways like ghosts, navigating channels that appeared on no official map. We knew every cypress knee, every hidden sandbar, every fork in the tangled maze of black water. The work was illegal, certainly, but it was ours, a tradition passed down through generations, a way of life that predated federal law and would likely outlast it. Until the night, everything changed. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us. The evening of September 14th began like any other. I met Harlan at his property just after sunset, when the oppressive heat of the Carolina day had finally begun to ease. The humidity remained thick enough to taste, and clouds of mosquitoes rose from the undergrowth in swarms that would drive a man mad if he dwelt on them too long. Harlan was 63 years old, his face carved by decades of sun and secrecy. He'd been running moonshine since before I was born, learning the trade from his father, who'd learned it from his. The old man moved with the careful economy of someone who'd spent a lifetime avoiding notice. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. "Weather's turning," he said as I approached, not looking up from where he secured the final crate in our flat-bottomed skiff. "Storm coming in from the coast, maybe 2 days out. We run tonight, or we don't run until next week." I nodded. The buyer had been waiting 3 days already. Any longer, and he'd find another supplier. Wade arrived next, younger than me by 5 years, but with twice the nerve. He carried himself with the swagger of a man who'd never truly been afraid, which made him either very brave or very stupid. Time would tell which. He checked his pistol, an old service revolver he'd inherited from an uncle, and tucked it behind his belt with the casual ease of long practice. Pearl came last, arriving in her ancient pickup truck that somehow still ran despite having no business doing so. She was Harlan's niece, sharp as broken glass and twice as dangerous if you crossed her. She kept our books, managed our contacts, and had a memory that could recall every detail of every run we'd ever made. The small ledger she carried held our entire operation between its worn covers. Simeon was already at the landing, having walked the 3 miles from his cabin rather than risk driving. He stood in the shadows with Harlan's shotgun broken open across his forearm, checking the shells with the methodical care of a man who knew that tools only worked when properly maintained. "Everyone's here," Harlan said. "Let's discuss the route." We gathered around the skiff, which sat low in the water under the weight of 6 wooden crates. Each crate held 12 mason jars of clear liquid that represented 3 nights of careful work. The smell of corn mash still clung to our clothes from the distilling process, sweet and sharp and unmistakable to anyone who knew what to smell for. "We take the main channel south through Scape Ore," Harlan began, tracing an invisible map in the air. "Keep to the deep water past the old pump house, then cut east at the Willow Stand. The flats open up there. We cross them to the fish camp on the far side. Buyer should be waiting with cash. We make the exchange. We're back here before midnight." "What about the wardens?" Wade asked. "Saw their trucks at the Bishopville store this afternoon," Harlan replied. "But they won't take the river road at night. Too easy to get stuck, too hard to see who's moving where. They'll stay on the highways." "What about the other thing?" Simeon asked quietly. We all knew what he meant. For the past week, strange stories had been circulating through the county. A car found torn apart near the swamp, its bonnet ripped open as though something had peeled it back like foil. Deep tracks in the mud that didn't match any known animal. A pump house destroyed, its door torn from the hinges and thrown 30 feet into the water. "Stories," Wade said dismissively. "People see shadows and invent monsters." "Maybe," Simeon replied. "But I know Tommy Rayburn, and he's not a man who scares easy. He swears he saw something moving through the shallows 2 nights ago. Something big, walking upright. Then Tommy Rayburn has been sampling too much of his own product," Wade said. "Enough," Harlan cut in. "We're not here to debate folklore. Eyes open, mouths shut, and we'll be fine. Everyone understand?" We understood. We loaded into the skiff. Harlan at the stern with his hand on the tiller, Wade in the bow with a spotlight and the pole for shallow water, Simeon in the middle with the shotgun, Pearl beside him with her ledger, and me handling the spare fuel can and extra rope. The small outboard motor coughed once, then caught with a low rumble that echoed off the water. Harlan throttled it down to barely above idle, just enough to push us forward against the sluggish current. "Cast off," he said. I unwound the mooring line from its post and pushed us away from the bank. The skiff slid into open water, and the shadows of the trees closed around us like a fist. The channel through Scape Ore Swamp was a narrow corridor of dark water cutting between walls of cypress and tupelo. Spanish moss hung from the branches in thick curtains that brushed our shoulders as we passed beneath. The air tasted of minerals and decay, the smell of things rotting in standing water, of life and death mixed together in the warm darkness. Cypress knees jutted from the water in clusters, their gnarled shapes creating a maze that required constant attention to navigate. One wrong turn and we'd run aground, or worse, damage the prop on a submerged log. Harlan knew every inch of this route by memory, though, steering us through with barely a glance at the water ahead. Foxfire glowed on a rotting stump to our left, that strange bioluminescent fungus that gave off a sickly green light. Wade swept the spotlight across it briefly, and the light seemed to be absorbed by the rotten wood rather than reflected. "Kill the light unless we need it," Harlan instructed. "No point advertising our presence." Wade switched it off. Darkness pressed in immediately, broken only by the dim moonlight filtering through the canopy and the occasional flash of foxfire on decaying wood. The frogs called in overlapping waves, thousands of them, their songs rising and falling in a rhythm as old as the swamp itself. Crickets filled every gap in the amphibian chorus, creating a wall of sound that was almost hypnotic. "Beautiful night," Pearl observed quietly. It was in its way. The swamp had a wild beauty that you couldn't find anywhere else. Untamed, ancient, indifferent to human presence. We were intruders here, moving through a world that had existed long before us and would continue long after. The motor thrummed steadily, pushing us forward at a pace just faster than a walking speed. Harlan lifted his hand at each fork in the channel, 2 fingers pointing the direction, and Wade leaned forward to watch for obstacles. "Keep it slow," Harlan said. Those warden trucks were definitely sniffing around. I don't expect them on the water, but I'm not willing to bet our freedom on it. "We could hide in a dozen places out here," Wade said with confidence. "They'd never find us unless we lit a signal fire." "We're not hiding," Pearl corrected. "We're making a delivery." "There's a difference." "She's right," Harlan agreed. "We act like criminals. We get treated like criminals. We act like businessmen. We've got plausible deniability." Simeon snorted softly. "Plausible deniability doesn't mean much when you're carrying 6 crates of illegal spirits." "It means everything," Pearl countered. "Attitude matters." We passed a small inlet where the water spread into a shallow pool, its surface perfectly still and reflecting the night sky like dark glass. A great blue heron stood motionless in the shallows, its silhouette stark against the water. It didn't move as we passed, didn't even turn its head. "Strange," Simeon murmured. "What's strange?" Wade asked. "That heron. They usually startle at the motor noise. That one's just watching." I looked back at the bird. It remained perfectly still, its long neck curved in that distinctive S shape, its eye barely visible in the darkness, fixed on our skiff. "It's a bird," Wade said. "It's doing bird things." "Maybe," Simeon replied, but he didn't sound convinced. The old pump house appeared on our right, a decrepit structure sitting on pilings above the water. It had been abandoned for decades, the metal siding eaten through by rust, the machinery inside long since seized and useless. Nobody came here anymore. It was just another forgotten relic of the swamp's industrial past. Except tonight, something was different. The door, which had always hung askew on its hinges, was now torn completely free. It dangled by a single corner, swinging slightly in some imperceptible current of air. As we drew closer, I saw that the hinges hadn't simply rusted through. They'd been ripped apart, the metal bent and twisted as though subjected to tremendous force. "Bloody hell," Wade muttered. Dark stains marked the threshold, running down the posts and into the water below. The stains looked old, but they gave off a smell that made my stomach turn. Not quite oil, not quite blood, but something metallic and wrong. A single egret perched under the crossbeam, balanced on one leg in that peculiar way herons have. It should have taken flight at our approach. They always did, startling at the slightest disturbance. Instead, it remained motionless, watching us pass with an intensity that felt almost accusatory. "That's not right," Simeon said quietly. "Just structural damage," Harlan replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Storm surge, probably. These old buildings fall apart on their own." "Storm surge doesn't bend hinges like that," I said. "That takes force. Deliberate force." "Are we stopping to investigate?" Wade asked. "No," Harlan said firmly. "We stay on schedule." We continued past the pump house, but I couldn't stop looking back at it. The egret hadn't moved, hadn't called out, hadn't done anything except watch us disappear into the darkness. Something about that stillness felt like a warning. The frogs, which had been calling steadily since we'd entered the swamp, suddenly went quiet. Not all at once. The silence spread gradually, like a wave moving through the water, each group of frogs falling silent in turn until the entire swamp had gone still. "You hear that?" Simeon asked. "I don't hear anything," Wade replied. "Exactly," Simeon said. "That's the problem." We drifted forward in the sudden silence, the motor's low rumble the only sound. Even the crickets had stopped their chirping. The swamp felt like it was holding its breath. "Probably nothing," Wade said, but he'd drawn his pistol and held it across his lap. "Eyes forward," Harlan instructed. "We're approaching." The sandbar appeared as a pale strip in the darkness, the shallow water spreading across it in a thin sheet that reflected what little moonlight penetrated the canopy. This was a known navigation hazard. The depth changed dramatically here, and if we weren't careful, we'd run aground and have to portage the skiff across. Harlan raised his hand and cut the motor. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the gentle lap of water against the hull and the soft hiss of our wake spreading across the sandbar. Wade climbed out first, the water reaching his knees. He took the pole and tested the depth, then gestured for us to angle left toward firmer sand. "Push us over," Harlan said. Carefully, he and I climbed out, the cool water seeping into our boots. The sand beneath felt solid enough, though it shifted slightly under our weight. We shouldered the bow and pushed the skiff toward the left, where the bottom felt more stable. Pearl stood up to stretch, one hand pressed to the small of her back. Then she froze. "Look at this," she said quietly. We gathered around where she pointed. 3 impressions marked the wet sand at even intervals, each one perfectly clear in the soft mud. The tracks showed 3 forward-facing toes, each ending in a wide pad. No heel mark, no rear claw. Each print was broader than my hand with fingers spread, and they'd sunk deep enough that water had begun seeping in from the edges. "What the bloody hell made that?" Wade asked. "Alligator," he added quickly, forcing a laugh. "Just dragged itself through here. Toes caught in the sand." "Alligators leave a belly slide," Simeon corrected, his voice low and controlled. "And they have 4 or 5 toes with claws visible on the sides. This is 2 steps with no tail mark, no belly drag. Whatever made this was walking." Harlan crouched beside the tracks, holding his hand above them without touching. I watched his expression shift from curiosity to concern. "That's a long stride," he said finally. "Longer than a man's stride. Quite a bit longer. Could be someone on stilts," Wade suggested, but nobody laughed. I turned to look at the bank where the tracks emerged from the undergrowth. The vegetation there had been pushed aside, branches bent downward at what would be shoulder height on a tall man, and a section of thorny, vine hung in a neat arc, the fibers stretched white where something had forced its way through. Whatever it was, it came from deep in the swamp, Pearl observed, and it went into the water. "Then it's gone," Harlan said. "Everyone back in the skiff. We're not standing here debating zoology." We climbed back aboard, Wade pulling himself up last and shaking water from his trouser legs. Harlan yanked the starter cord. The motor coughed, sputtered, then caught. We moved forward again, leaving the mysterious tracks behind. But I couldn't stop thinking about them. The depth of the impressions suggested tremendous weight. The spacing suggested something tall. And the fact that they led directly into the water, with no corresponding tracks leading out, suggested that whatever made them was comfortable in the swamp's depths. The next section of channel ran beneath a heavy canopy that blocked most of the sky. The temperature dropped noticeably as we entered the shadows, the air taking on a damp, earthy smell like the inside of a cave. The cypress trees here were enormous, their trunks thick enough that 3 men couldn't encircle them with linked arms. Something moved in the water to our left, creating a line of ripples that spread between the cypress knees. Whatever it was didn't surface, just a disturbance beneath the waterline, moving parallel to us for several seconds before disappearing. "Gator?" Wade asked, sweeping the spotlight across the water. "Maybe," Harlan replied, "or a large snake. Cottonmouths get big in here." The frogs remained silent. A single woodpecker tapped against a dead cypress trunk. 3 sharp raps, then went still. The only other sounds were the soft buzz of insects and the gentle splash of our wake against the trees. We approached another landing, one we sometimes used when the river ran higher in the spring. An old chain hung from an eye-bolt screwed into a massive live oak, the metal links creaking as they swayed in some imperceptible breeze. The iron ring at the end tapped against the trunk with a hollow sound. Wade swept the spotlight up the tree, and we all saw it at once. 3 deep gouges ran down the bark in parallel lines, each one perfectly straight and spaced evenly apart. They started higher than Harlan could reach, perhaps 8 or 9 feet off the ground, and ran downward for at least 4 feet. Fresh sap had wept from the wounds encrusted around the edges, showing that the damage was recent. Pearl drew in a sharp breath through her nose, but said nothing. "Bear," Wade said, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. "No bears this close to the settled areas," Harlan replied. "Not for 30 years at least. My father used to tell stories about them, but they've been pushed deeper into the wilderness." "Then what made those marks?" I asked. "Does it matter?" Harlan replied. "Whatever it was, it's not here now. Keep moving." We passed the landing and took the narrow cut to the right, where the channel constricted and became choked with reeds. This stretch required pole work. The motor would foul immediately if we tried to push through with it running. Harlan raised the propeller and secured the tiller. Wade took up his pole, and I grabbed the second one. Pearl held the spotlight low and tight, keeping the beam close to the skiff to avoid flashing light through the trees and attracting unwanted attention. Simeon sat perfectly still, the shotgun across his lap, his head turning in small, controlled movements as he listened to the swamp. The reeds brushed our wrists as we pushed through, their dry stalks rustling with a sound like whispered secrets. Something had flattened a trail through them ahead of us, a wide swath of bent and broken reeds that pointed toward open water. The trail was fresh, the broken stalks still oozed moisture. I set my pole carefully, feeling the bottom shift from soft mud to firm where tree roots knotted beneath the muck. The skiff moved forward with barely a sound, gliding through the narrow channel. Behind us, I heard a splash. Heavy, deliberate. Then another, farther off. I turned to look back. The channel showed only small ripples in the reflected spotlight beam, their origin unclear. I strained to hear any further sounds over my own breathing and the soft rub of the pole against my palm. The silence pressed in like a physical weight. "Don't stop," Harlan said quietly. "We're almost to the willow stand. We'll rest there." The willows appeared ahead, a tight cluster in a shallow pool, their thin branches forming a curtain that swayed in some current of air I couldn't feel. As we nosed into the shelter of their trailing limbs, Harlan set his hand against the trunk to hold us steady. "Kill the light for a moment," he instructed. "Let's listen." Pearl switched off the spotlight. Darkness dropped over us like a curtain, so complete that I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The sudden blindness was disorienting, making me acutely aware of the subtle movements of the skiff, the sound of water lapping against the hull, the breathing, of my companions. I heard something else, a soft tapping sound, rhythmic like water dripping onto it somewhere out in the channel. "Light," Harlan said. Pearl triggered the spotlight. For just a heartbeat, before my eyes could adjust, the beam caught two red points between the cypress knees across the cut. They hung low to the water, perhaps 2 feet apart, glowing with that distinctive eye shine of reflected light. But they were wrong. Too far apart from most animals. Too level, both points at exactly the same height, suggesting binocular vision like a predator's. Before anyone could speak, the points sank beneath the surface. A ring of ripples spread where they'd been, growing wider until they lapped against the cypress knees and disappeared. "Alligator eyes," Wade said, but his jaw had tightened. "They reflect light like that." "They were set too far apart for a small one," Pearl observed. "And too level. Alligators sit lower in the water." Harlan stared past us into the darkness. "It doesn't matter what they belong to. We keep moving." We pushed clear of the willows, and the channel opened into a broad flat where the water spread shallow over dark soil. Our route lay across the middle, with a bottom held firm enough to support the skiff's weight. A massive fallen cypress blocked the far edge, a tree so thick that our skiff couldn't possibly pass over it. The trunk lay crosswise to our path, its root ball torn up and thrust toward the sky like a giant's clenched fist. "That wasn't down last time," I said. "Storm must have dropped it," Wade suggested. "There hasn't been a storm strong enough to topple a tree that size for weeks," Harlan replied. "And look at the break." We pulled closer, and I saw what he meant. The wood fibers where the tree had snapped were clean and pale, showing no signs of rot or weathering. There was no spiral grain in the break pattern that would indicate wind damage. The tree had been subjected to tremendous force in a single direction, snapping it cleanly. A dark film coated the bark where the trunk had settled into the mud. The substance gave off a sharp, metallic smell that cut through the usual swamp stink of decay and stagnant water. I reached out with the tip of my pole and touched it. The film clung to the wood, drawing into a thin thread when I lifted the pole. The thread stretched, then snapped, falling back in a ribbon. "Don't touch that again," Pearl said sharply. She'd pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and pressed it to her nose and mouth. Simeon reached out with 2 fingers and touched the wood above the film. "It's cold," he said. "The air is warm, but this is cold. We'll have to portage around it," Harlan said, studying the gap between the trunk and a bank of reeds. 2 at the bow, 2 at the stern, 1 watching the cargo. We don't set anything down. We don't stumble. We move once, cleanly, and then we're through to the main channel. We grounded the skiff on the firmest patch we could find and climbed out. The mud immediately sucked at our boots, making each step an effort. Mosquitoes descended in clouds, winding around our ears and crawling across any exposed skin. I try not to breathe through my mouth. Wade reached for the bow handle and glanced toward the reeds. Something moved beyond them. Not wind, but a slow, deliberate push that bent the tops and then released them. The movement stopped when we looked directly at it. "On my count," Harlan said. 1, 2, lift." We lifted. The hull cleared the mud with a sucking sound, and the weight pressed into our palms. Pearl steadied the middle bench, keeping the crates from shifting. I moved backward toward the opening Harlan had indicated, the reeds brushing my shoulders. That smell from the fallen trunk reached us again, stronger here, making the back of my throat tighten. It reminded me of blood left too long in the sun, mixed with something chemical and wrong. We set the bow down on a patch of drier ground. Wade's boots sank to the ankle, and he grunted with effort. Harlan grabbed his elbow and helped pull him up. We adjusted our grip and lifted again, carrying the skiff through the narrow opening. The reeds parted to reveal a strip of packed earth where feral hogs had passed at some point, their tracks still visible in the hardened mud. Fresh marks cut across that strip, 3 splayed toes, evenly spaced, in a row that led from deeper water to the far side of the fallen trunk. The edges of the prints were sharp and clean, showing they'd been made recently. A small puddle had collected in one depression, and as I watched, the water's surface quivered despite the complete absence of wind. "Move," Harlan said. No pausing. We reached the gap, and lowered the skiff into a channel no wider than a car. The bottom here felt firm underfoot, compressed sand rather than soft mud. Pearl climbed in first to keep the cargo steady. Simeon followed, setting the shotgun on the floorboards without taking his eyes off the reeds. I took the stern and pushed off with one foot. Harlan kept a hand on my shoulder until I had my balance, then climbed aboard. We used the poles to clear the trunk, sliding through the narrow gap. The spotlight fell on the bark where the cold film had smeared. I noticed something strange. The surface looked dry now, though not enough time had passed for that to happen naturally. I felt movement under the skiff. Not our poling. This came from deeper down, a slow rise and fall as though something large were displacing the water beneath us. The hull bumped gently, without force, then settled again. Pearl glanced at me and nodded once. She felt it too. We didn't speak. The channel bent left and rejoined the main waterway. The frogs had not returned. The only sounds were the thin buzz of insects and the soft slide of wood against mud as we pulled forward. Harlan lowered the motor and tried the pull cord. It caught on the second tug, the noise feeling obscenely loud in the silence. We moved ahead. Wade kept the spotlight aimed low, into the water rather than onto the banks. Red points showed again to the right, higher than before, well above the waterline inside the first row of trees beyond the cypress knees. They held perfectly still for several seconds. Then they closed, not with the smooth, downward motion of an eyelid, but simply extinguishing like switched-off lights. Wade swept the beam back, but they were gone. "Alligators don't move like that," Simeon said quietly. "Enough," Harlan replied. "The buyer is waiting. We focus on the job." "I am focused," Simeon said. "I want to know what stands between us and that job. I want to know how close it is," Wade added, his voice tight. We moved past a stand of black gum trees with low-hanging branches. Strips of bark had been torn away in neat pieces, every strip exactly the same width, as though something had gripped and pulled downward with systematic precision. I kept my eyes forward. My palms had picked up grit from the poles, and the slight abrasion somehow calmed me more than it should have. There was something reassuring about physical discomfort, about sensation that confirmed I was real and present and alive. Pearl turned a page in her ledger and marked the time in the margin with a pencil stub. She closed the book and slid it under her leg for safekeeping. The main channel opened at last into a wider body of water with a sandbar along one side. The fish camp lay beyond two narrow points that formed a short inlet. We'd used this location since spring. The buyer preferred it because the camp was isolated and difficult to reach except by water. Tonight, a lamp should have been burning in the east-facing cabin window. Instead, the building sat in complete darkness. Wade raised the spotlight and swept it across the bar. A chain ran from a drift log to a stake near the waterline. The stake leaned at a severe angle. Dark stains marked the sand around it. "Slow down," Harlan said, throttling back. "We'll land behind the bar. Check the camp before we unload." The skiff touched bottom with a low scraping sound. I stepped out first, pulling the bow line to secure us. The sand yielded slightly, but held my weight. Through the rope, I felt a vibration, a faint tremor that didn't match the motor's rhythm. It felt like a distant footstep transmitted through the ground. I looked at the cabin. The door stood open. The screen hung free, torn from its hinges. A chair lay on its side on the porch, one leg snapped. "Something's wrong," I said. Simeon climbed onto the bar with the shotgun under his arm. Wade crouched to study the stains in the sand, touching the edge with one finger. "Not oil," he said. He lifted his fingers. A thin layer of clear residue clung to them, breaking into strands as he separated his fingers. "Same as the trunk. Smell it." We did. The same sour, metallic scent, but thinner here, diluted by exposure to air. The wind shifted, carrying a different smell from the shallow water inside the inlet. A cold, stone-like odor that didn't belong to any swamp or fish. "Stay near the skiff," Harlan instructed. "I'll check the cabin." "No," Pearl said firmly. "We go together. We've seen enough to know that splitting up is foolish." Harlan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we stay in a line. I take point." We moved across the bar toward the inlet, our boots crunching on the sand and shell fragments. The sand gave way to packed mud, and I noticed a pattern of round depressions. At first I thought they were crab holes, but Wade lifted the spotlight higher, and I saw they were parts of larger tracks. 3 deep toes. No heel. The stride matched what we'd seen at the sandbar, but these tracks angled toward the cabin, then returned to the water. One set inward, one set outward. The inward-leading tracks pressed deeper, as though whatever made them had been carrying weight. We reached the porch. Harlan raised his hand. "Hold here." He stepped to the side of the door and leaned in just enough to see inside. "Empty," he said. "No bodies, no movement." We entered cautiously. The front room smelled of paraffin and wet wool. A lamp had fallen and rolled under a table without breaking. Its wick burned out. The cot against the far wall lay bare except for a blanket bunched near the foot. The buyer's tin lockbox sat open on a chair by the window. The inner tray had been bent upward and twisted completely free. Cash wrappers lay torn on the floor. There were no banknotes anywhere. The corner of the table showed deep gouges that matched the marks we'd seen on the gumtree bark. "Someone got here first," Wade said, "but not the wardens. They would have taken a box. They wouldn't have twisted it apart and left it." Pearl checked the back room. Cookware on the hooks. Nothing boiling. A cup by the basin. A jacket on a nail. She touched the jacket sleeve and drew her hand back quickly. Damp, but not from rain. From the air. She looked at the window frame. The nails are bent. The screen is wrenched. Something came through here. Harlan walked to the rear door and looked at the yard. A rain barrel sat empty with the lid lying on the ground several feet away. The side of the barrel had 4 holes punched in a straight line. Clean holes, not cracks or splits, but deliberate punctures. A single mason jar lay broken near the steps, glass glittering in the spotlight beam. The smell of our product cut through the other odors briefly before thinning to nothing as it soaked into the ground. Simeon raised the shotgun to shoulder height, keeping it trained on the yard. "Tracks," he said. We stepped on a back porch. The yard was a square of hard earth with a path leading to a dock that reached into the inlet. 2 boards had been pried up from the dock and set carefully aside. The tracks ran from the window to the barrel, then across the yard toward the dock. Each step had displaced small stones, forcing them up from below and leaving them sitting on the surface. At the dock, the tracks vanished on the weathered planks, only to reappear at the water's edge where wetwood briefly held the impression before the water lifted it away. We followed to the end of the dock. The inlet looked darker than the rest of the swamp, the water so black it seemed to absorb the spotlight beam rather than reflect it. Bubbles rose near the last post, breaking in small rings that faded quickly. That cold smell came stronger from this spot, making my skin prickle. "Back to the skiff," Harlan said. "We leave now. The buyer's gone. We won't wait for him." "We'll lose the sale," Wade protested. "We'll be alive," Pearl replied. We turned toward the porch. A sound came from beneath it, boards straining, nails creaking, and a wet, rasping breath that pulled in and released. Not through a mouth shaped like ours. It sounded deeper, as though the air moved through a larger cavity. Simeon set his foot on the first step. The board sagged, and something shifted beneath. He stepped back quickly. The space under the porch was open on the yard side. I'd never looked under there on previous runs. Tonight, the spotlight beam brushed across the gap. Red points showed again, not low to the water this time, but beneath our feet. They remained perfectly still. The rest of the shape stayed in deep shadow, impossible to make out clearly. The breathing continued. Slow, steady, patient. Harlan didn't raise his voice. Slow steps. Back away. Don't run. Keep your weight centered. Don't look away from it. We backed 3 steps. The red points moved, not by much, perhaps an inch. Then they rose a hand's breadth, as though the head had lifted slightly. The porch creaked. The shape didn't squeeze or struggle. It occupied the space without apparent effort, as comfortable there as a man in his own home. It had been there whilst we checked the rooms. It had listened to us walking above it. Now we go, Harlan said. We turned and walked across the yard with controlled, measured steps. The air felt heavier, harder to breathe. That cold smell faded the farther we got from the porch, which made me think whatever it was wouldn't follow far from water. We passed through the front room again. Wade stopped and reached for a loose banknote on the floor. Pearl hissed at him. He left it. We reached the sandbar. The skiff waited exactly where we'd left it. I slid the bow line over the post and pulled until the hull floated. Simeon climbed in first and took his place with the shotgun. Pearl followed, covering the crates with 2 canvas sacks. Wade and I pushed off together. Harlan stayed until last, stepping aboard without looking back at the porch. He pulled the starter cord. The motor caught immediately. We eased around the sandbar toward the open channel. The dock behind us creaked once, a long, drawn-out sound. Then silence. The red points did not appear again. We set course for the channel that would carry us in a straight line toward the river mouth. Harlan kept the motor at a steady speed, not so fast as to draw attention, but fast enough to put distance between us and whatever had waited beneath that porch. Nobody spoke for a long minute. The only sound were the motor's low rumble and a gentle splash of water against the hull. I had a thought that wouldn't leave me alone. The tracks had shown an approach and a departure. The barrel holes had clean edges, suggesting tremendous strength. The lockbox tray had been bent beyond human capability, and the thing under the porch had waited without rushing us, though it could have attacked at any moment. It's not only hungry, I said quietly. It's curious. Curiosity doesn't matter, Harlan replied. Distance matters. Speed matters. We cannot outrun what lives here, Simeon said. We can only outlast it. Pearl looked back once, then set her eyes firmly on the path ahead. Then hold steady, she said, and don't give it reason to change its mind. The pursuit. We entered the long channel that led back toward Scape Ore Swamp's outer reaches. The waterway widened enough that the cypress knees gave us more room on each side, and Harlan opened the throttle slightly. The increased motor noise pushed back against the swamp silence, and for a moment, I welcomed the sound. The night air pressed against my face, carrying a hint of open water ahead, a promise of escape, of returning to the world of people and electric lights and locked doors. I checked the crates. The mason jars sat secure and quiet beneath the canvas sacks. Pearl kept one hand on them despite the smooth ride, her fingers white-knuckled on the fabric. We don't stop again, Harlan announced. Not for anything. Wade nodded, keeping the spotlight sweeping in slow arcs across the right bank. Each pass showed mud flats, half-sunken logs, and still water between the cypress knees. Nothing else. But the frogs still hadn't returned. That absence bothered me more than the red eyes had. The swamp was never silent like this. Silence here meant something else had claimed the space where life should be thriving. Simeon leaned close to me. It watched us under that porch whilst we walked over its head. He said quietly, "That doesn't sit right." "Nothing about this sits right," I agreed. "But we're moving away from it." "You saw the tracks," he said. "It walks faster than our pace through the shallows. If it wants to keep up, it will." I wanted to argue, to insist that it would stay near the camp, but my own memory of those red points moving from water to trees told me not to offer comfort I didn't believe. I kept my grip on the gunwale tight enough to feel the wood's edge pressing into my palm. We passed the willow stand again. The branches brushed against the side of the hull with a scratching sound that seemed far too loud. Wade pointed the spotlight through the curtain of trailing limbs. The Spanish moss had been torn loose, scattered as though something had brushed through with considerable force. On the mud, just beyond the willows, 3 fresh tracks dug deep into the soft earth. The water inside them looked clean, no film, no residue. "It didn't stay at the camp," Pearl observed. "Eyes ahead," Harlan said, not slowing. "We stay centered in the deep channel. If something moves in the shallows, we outrun it." Wade raised the spotlight higher. The beam caught insects in brief moments of illumination before they vanished back into the darkness. I listened for movement behind us and heard only the motor and the hull cutting through the water. We reached the bend near the old pump house. The egret was gone. The door that had been hanging askew now lay flat in the water, one corner touching a cypress knee. The hinge clanked once as our wake reached it. Harlan flicked his eyes in that direction, then looked to the fork ahead. Left, he said. We cut a mile off that way. Pearl shifted uncomfortably. The left fork runs close to the ridge. It's narrow and tight. Harlan nodded, which means we're harder to follow. We took the left fork. The water narrowed dramatically, and reeds grew taller, bending inward until they brushed our shoulders. They made a dry, whispering sound against the boat that reminded me of voices just below the threshold of comprehension. Wade angled the spotlight straight ahead. The beam struck a low-hanging branch with long grooves carved deep into its bark. The grooves crossed each other in a chaotic pattern, not straight like the ones we'd seen before. They twisted and overlapped as though something had been sharpening claws or practicing. That wasn't there earlier, Wade said. Perhaps we missed it, I suggested, though I knew we hadn't. We'd come through this way many times, and I would have noticed marks like that. Simeon set the shotgun in the crook of his arm, barrel pointed upward. His grip looked calm and controlled, but his breathing had changed, shorter, more measured, the way a man breathes when he's preparing for action. The motor churned through patches of mud, leaving a cloudy trail in our wake. That smell of cold residue returned in intermittent waves, stronger in some spots than others. The channel bent right around a cluster of cypresses where roots rose into a tight maze. Harlan slowed to navigate the obstacles without scraping the hull. The reeds on both sides rustled in a long, rolling wave that passed from behind us toward the bow. Something pacing us, or perhaps wind, though there was no wind. How far until open water? Pearl asked, her voice remarkably even. A minute, Harlan replied. Perhaps less. The channel widened gradually. I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The trees fell back, and the sky opened enough to show a slice of pale moon above the tree crowns. The main river lay ahead, dark but broad, with a current that would carry us swiftly once we reached it. We could be out of the swamp before midnight if everything went smoothly. Wade leaned forward, ready to sweep the next corner with the spotlight. He froze mid-motion, his shoulders tensing visibly. The beam had landed on something on the right bank. At first glance, it appeared to be a weathered fence post rising from the mud. Then I saw it more clearly. The pump house door, the same one that had been lying in the water moments ago, now standing upright, lodged between two cypress knees. Deep claw marks scored its entire length, fresh enough that the wood splinters stood white and raw. It pulled the door from the water, Wade said, his voice hollow. Dragged it here. It knows the waterways, Pearl said. It moves through them as though they're home. Harlan opened the throttle, pushing us into the main channel. The skiff surged forward, the reeds thinned, and our wake began to spread wide behind us. The frogs still refused to call. Only the crickets hummed, and even they sounded subdued. We reached the middle of the river, and the current caught us, adding its force to our motor's thrust. It felt marginally safer in motion, with water behind us and distance growing. My mind began to loosen slightly. Perhaps we would return to the landing, unload the crates at Harlan's place, and write this run off as a loss. We'd avoid this section of the swamp in future. The story would become something we only discussed when the night grew too quiet and someone needed a tale to fill the silence. The motor sputtered. Every one of us looked back at Harlan. He tapped the fuel line and tried the throttle. The motor caught briefly, then sputtered again. The bow dipped as our speed dropped. The current began pulling us sideways toward a shallow area where submerged snags waited. Bloody hell, not now, Wade muttered. It's the fuel, Harlan said. Switch the valve to the reserve can. I reached for the line and turned the switch. The motor roared once, a brief surge of power, then cut completely. The sudden silence pressed in like a physical weight. Momentum carried us forward for several seconds, but we'd lost all control. The hull scraped something beneath the waterline, wood or stone, then cleared it. We were drifting toward the right bank, where the cypress knees grew thick again. Poles, Harlan ordered. Keep us off the roots. We grabbed the poles and shoved hard against the nearest cypress knees, slowing our drift. The current remained strong enough to force us toward the bank despite our efforts. The trees here leaned close, their roots twisted into the water like grasping fingers. That cold smell returned, sharp and stale and wrong. Wade aimed the spotlight across the bank. Red points gleamed between the cypress knees, closer than before, much closer. The beam locked onto them, and they didn't blink or turn away. They remained level with each other, unmoving, patient. The shadow behind them resolved into a shape as the creature stepped forward into the light. It stood taller than any man I'd ever seen, shoulders higher than a grown person by at least a foot. The arms hung long at its sides, ending in three-fingered hands with wide, paddle-like digits. Green scales covered its body, catching the light and reflecting a dull, wet sheen like oiled leather. The chest pushed forward with steady breaths that I could hear even over the water's movement. Water dripped from its legs into the channel, each drop creating small rings on the surface. Simeon raised a shotgun. Harlan grabbed his arm firmly. No shooting unless it comes for us. We don't provoke what we cannot stop. The creature moved one deliberate step, placing its foot on the edge of a cypress knee. The wood creaked under its weight, but held. Its head tilted slightly, and those red eyes seemed to glow brighter, the pupils narrow but not like a snake's, more like they were adjusting to focus on us. It followed us from the camp, Pearl said quietly. It wants to know where we go. The creature's throat moved, and a low sound emerged, deep and uneven, like air forced through a wet pipe. It carried a note that didn't match any animal call I'd ever heard. It wasn't a warning growl. It wasn't hunger. It sounded almost like a question. The current spun our stern slightly toward deeper water. The creature watched the movement with obvious interest. It crouched, ready to leap or pursue. Harlan eased the tiller, trying to guide us with nothing but the rudder's drag against the current. Don't slip, he said. Stay low. The skiff caught a current line and pulled away from the bank bit by bit. The creature's head lowered, tracking our movement. I gripped my pole harder, ready to fend off an attack if it came. Pearl's hand went to the canvas sacks covering the crates, steadying them again, as though maintaining order would somehow keep us all calm. The creature stepped onto another cypress knee, but didn't pursue further. Those red points remained fixed on us until we reached the midpoint of the river. Then it sank behind the roots and vanished, as though the swamp had simply swallowed it whole. We pulled harder with the poles until the current centered us properly. The motor remained dead. Harlan reached for the pull cord, then paused. Take one breath, he said quietly. Don't think about it. Think about the engine. He pulled. The motor sputtered once, twice, then fell silent. He pulled again. This time it caught. Not a sputter, but a steady, reliable hum. Nobody cheered. Wade kept the spotlight trained on the bank until the trees pulled away behind us. Simeon remained braced with the shotgun. Pearl released a breath that shook once before she steadied it. Harlan brought us back to cruising speed. The landing was still some distance away, but straight water lay ahead. Beyond it would be houses, dogs, electric lights, human voices, places where cold smells and red eyes didn't belong. We thought we were clear. The swamp wasn't finished with us yet. We followed the main river southward, staying close to the middle where the current ran strongest. Harlan checked the fuel line twice more, keeping pressure on the clamp with his thumb, as though his grip alone could keep the motor running. The bow cut a narrow path through the dark water, each swell of our wake rippling outward until it disappeared beneath roots and mud banks. Nobody looked back. It felt as though turning around would invite something to rise behind us. We keep straight until the fire tower, Harlan instructed. Then the landing comes quickly on the right. We tie up, unload nothing, and lock the gate behind us. Wade nodded, eyes fixed forward. What about the crates? We keep them until the buyer sends word, Pearl said. But we don't linger outside tonight. Her calm tone gave the words more weight than panic would have. The air lightened somewhat as the channel widened further. More moonlight reached the water's surface. The frogs finally began calling again, just a thin chorus at first, tentative but real. I almost allowed myself to believe the worst was behind us. Then the calls stopped. Not all at once, one voice at a time, each falling silent in turn until the air had flattened again into that unnatural quiet. "It's still near," Simeon said. "We don't know that," Harlan replied, but without conviction. "We know enough," Simeon answered. We rounded a slow bend, and the river straightened. The fire tower should have been visible ahead, a tall silhouette with a square cabin at the top, usually marked by a single red warning beacon. Tonight, no light burned. Wade raised the spotlight and swept the tree line. The tower stood there, but the top cabin leaned noticeably, as though one of the support beams had shifted or buckled. "That light was working when we came through earlier," Simeon observed. "The bank floods near there sometimes," Harlan said, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Perhaps the ground gave way. We saw claw marks on trees as tall as that porch," Pearl said. "It's not difficult to imagine the tower being tested as well." Wade moved the spotlight beam upward. The entire right side of the structure bore deep gouges. One support leg had bent inward, the metal visibly warped. The base of the tower lay littered with broken planks and twisted railing pieces. Something had climbed it, or tried to pull it down. Harlan throttled up, wanting distance. The skiff jumped forward. We approached another curve, and a shape on the left bank blocked part of the moonlight. A motor car, an old saloon, its bonnet torn open like split tin. The windscreen had cracked from the inside, a starburst pattern radiating outward. The driver's door was completely missing. The metal showed deep indentations, 3 wide circles pressed in at even intervals, like finger marks from an enormous hand. "That clerk wasn't lying," Wade whispered. "This is what he meant." "Eyes ahead," Harlan said, his jaw flexing with tension. The wreckage passed, swallowed by trees. The river narrowed again near a stand of pines, their lower trunks clean of branches, standing straight like walls on either side. Moonlight reflected off something nailed to one of them, a cast iron sign from a petrol company. The sign hung at a crooked angle, its surface twisted and dented. The company logo had stretched into an unrecognizable shape. One corner still held firm to its nail. The rest drooped limply. "Signs, motor cars, cabins," Simeon said. "It tests everything. It's learning where people go." The thought made my stomach drop. Not just hunting, understanding, planning. The motor hummed steadily. We passed between the pines into a long clearing that opened on the right, where water ran shallow over smooth stone. I recognized the place, an old logging slide, long abandoned. A path led from there into woods that eventually reached the main road. Something splashed ahead, not small like a fish breaking the surface, but heavy like a full body dropping into deep water from a height. Harlan slowed, but didn't stop. Wade swept the spotlight across the area. The water had already smoothed. No bubbles, no ripple trail to indicate direction. "Keep going," Pearl said quietly. We did. When the first sight of the landing lights flickered through the branches, a wave of relief washed over me, so suddenly I nearly sagged forward. 3 lanterns strung along the dock posts. The corrugated iron roof of the storage shed glinting faintly in their glow. Civilization. Safety. We were close. Harlan exhaled audibly. "Good. We'll leave the skiff secured. We take the crate count inside and—" All 3 lanterns went dark simultaneously. Not fading out gradually, they were simply extinguished, every one at once. No movement around them that we could see, no wind to blow them out. The lights simply died. The only illumination remaining was Wade's spotlight and the thin crescent moon above. "It's waiting for us," Simeon said, his knuckles whitening around the shotgun. "We're not far," Harlan replied. "We make a straight line for the ramp. We got solid ground beneath us there, and we can reach the truck. We risk getting stuck in shallow water," Wade argued. "No," Pearl said firmly. Away from the landing, the ground turns to sinkholes, mud 4 feet deep in places. We wouldn't see it until we'd stepped in and couldn't pull ourselves free. Forward, then, Harlan decided. The landing sat in perfectly still water. No current there, no sound except our motor's approach. Wade swallowed hard. "Say something," he whispered. Pearl stared straight ahead. "The swamp doesn't want us talking." The motor carried us closer. The ramp became visible, wet stone steps leading up to the gravel path. Harlan angled the stern to pull us alongside for a clean exit. The bow bumped gently against the dock. A massive thud sounded from beneath the hull. We all froze. Another thud, harder this time. The entire skiff jumped in the water. The surface around us swelled in a single large rise, as though something had displaced an enormous volume of water from directly below. "Go," Harlan hissed. "Now!" I grabbed the bow line and leapt onto the dock. My boots slipped once on the wet wood, but I caught myself against the post. I braced my legs and pulled the skiff close. Pearl shoved her ledger into her jacket and handed me the first crate. It felt heavier now, perhaps from water seepage, or perhaps my nerves made everything feel more burdensome. Simeon climbed out next, shotgun sweeping left and right in controlled arcs. Wade shut off the spotlight to conserve the battery and stepped out behind him, pistol drawn and ready. Pearl followed carefully, composed despite everything. Harlan came last, tying a quick half-inch knot. The swamp behind us remained utterly silent. No eyes, no movement, no breathing sounds. We hurried toward the ramp, our boots crunching on gravel. Normal sound, welcome sound that belonged to the human world. Then something shattered wood behind us. Not like a branch snapping, like the dock itself had been struck with tremendous force. Pearl turned halfway. "Don't!" A wet, dragging noise followed, boards flexing under tremendous weight. Simeon raised the shotgun and clicked off the safety. "Keep going," Harlan commanded. "Don't turn around." We faced forward again, 20 feet to the gate. The dragging sound approached slowly, deliberately. Not rushed, confident. Stone underfoot now. 10 feet. The gate right there within reach. A sudden breath behind us. Thick, cold, far too close. Harlan dropped his crate and spun, pulling the flare gun from his belt. He fired without hesitation. The flare arced bright red over the dock, and in its burst of crimson light, we saw it clearly for the first time. Standing fully emerged from the water, as tall as the cabin ceiling we'd passed earlier. Green scales glistening wetly against its thick, muscular frame. 3-fingered hands wrapped around a snapped dock post, gripping it like a club. Its chest rose and fell in slow, deep drafts. And those eyes, wide apart, burning red, fixed on us with unmistakable intelligence and intent. The flare burned down, falling toward the water. Darkness rushed back. "Move!" Pearl shouted, grabbing my arm. The truck waited behind the fence, exactly where Harlan had left it. The padlock hung open. He must have loosened it earlier to facilitate a quick escape if needed. He shoved the gate open, and we scrambled through. Simeon swung around to face the ramp, shotgun raised and steady. The dragging sound had stopped. Silence. Nothing visible in the darkness. But that silence felt like a held breath. Not empty, but full of potential violence. Wade killed the truck's alarm with his key fob, the beep obscenely loud in the quiet. Harlan hauled himself behind the wheel and turned the ignition. The engine cranked slowly, reluctant to wake. He tried again. The starter whined. Nothing caught. "Come on," Harlan muttered. "Come on, damn you." I unloaded the first crate into the truck bed and returned for the second. Pearl helped with steady hands, though she checked behind us once, then forced her eyes forward again, as though looking too long might draw the creature closer. Simeon stepped backward through the gate, still covering the dock with the shotgun. "I don't see it," he said. "That's not reassuring," Wade replied. "It was 30 feet away 2 seconds ago." "It didn't chase after the flare," Pearl observed. "It studies us first, waits to see what we do." "That thing doesn't need to think," Wade argued. "It just needs to reach us." "Both can be true," Pearl said. Harlan turned the key a third time. The engine coughed, struggled, then roared to life. Headlights flicked on, illuminating trees across the access road. For a moment, hope surged. Then behind us would groan again. Heavy footsteps crushed the ramp planks, one step at a time, slow and deliberate, as though it wanted us to hear every inch it claimed. "Get in," Harlan shouted. Nobody argued. Wade climbed into the passenger seat. I hoisted the remaining crates into the bed. Pearl slammed the tailgate shut. Simeon stepped back last, shotgun still trained on the darkness. Harlan threw the truck into reverse. A hand appeared at the bottom of the ramp. 3 thick fingers gripped the edge of the concrete, each digit as large as a man's forearm. The rest of it followed, one shoulder emerging from shadow, then another. The creature hauled itself up onto the land, water streaming off its scales in long rivulets. It stood to its full height on the flat ground, no longer needing to hunch beneath a porch or hide in water. Those red eyes fixed on us again. Harlan floored the accelerator. The tires spun on gravel, throwing small stones against the fence. The truck lurched backward, then shot forward past us up the access road. Branches scraped the sides like claws dragging along metal. Headlights bounced wildly. Wade clutched the dashboard. I twisted in my seat to look back. The landing fell away behind the tree-line. The creature didn't roar or sprint in pursuit, but its shape moved into the road's entrance. Not rushing, but closing distance through sheer efficiency. Every stride was long, purposeful, utterly silent except for the weight that bent small saplings as it passed. "Drive faster," Simeon urged. No shout in his voice, just controlled urgency. "I am," Harlan replied through gritted teeth. The tires hit tarmac. The engine found proper traction on the paved surface. We accelerated sharply. The trees gave way to open fields. The smell of grass replaced the swamp's damp rot. For a breath, the world looked normal again. Farmland, fences, the distant lights of houses. A heavy thud struck the truck bed. Pearl whipped around. "Check the crates." I leaned over the seat back and saw one canvas sack knocked loose. A mason jar had rolled free and shattered at the corner of the bed, clear liquid spreading across the metal. Another impact rocked the entire vehicle. Something massive had grabbed the tailgate from outside, its weight dragging against our momentum. "Hold on," Harlan yelled. He swerved violently left. The force behind us didn't release its grip. The truck fishtailed, rear tires sliding across the tarmac, but Harlan wrestled it back under control. I crawled in the truck bed, broken glass crunching under my knee. A crate slid toward the edge. I caught it before it toppled over. 2 fingers, enormous, scaled, glistening with that cold residue, curled over the top edge of the tailgate. The pads on those fingers left wet prints on the metal. The tailgate hinges groaned as something pulled against them with inexorable force. Simeon rolled down the rear window and leaned out halfway, shotgun braced against his shoulder. "Move," he shouted at me. I dropped flat against the truck bed. The blast cracked the night. Pellets struck some. The fingers jerked, but didn't release their grip. A wet, rumbling sound came from behind us. Not pain, not fear. Annoyance, perhaps. Or determination. Again, Wade shouted. Simeon fired his second barrel directly at the grip. This time a hand released suddenly. The truck lurched forward with the abrupt freedom, and I grabbed the crate edge to keep from being thrown around. Harlan didn't slow. The road curved left and opened onto a bridge crossing a narrow channel of the swamp. Concrete barriers lined both sides, leaving nowhere to maneuver if anything blocked our path. The creature appeared in the headlights, standing in the center of the bridge, directly in our path. We couldn't stop. There was no time, no space. "Brace yourselves." Harlan leaned into the steering wheel. The impact hit hard. We struck at an angle, catching the creature's side rather than head-on. It didn't react like flesh and bone should. It absorbed the collision and rolled over the bonnet, its weight crushing the metal. The windscreen spiderwebbed from corner to corner. A crack ran diagonally across the driver's side, obscuring Harlan's view. A heavy shape thudded onto the roof, sliding toward the back. The entire truck tilted under the weight, suspension creaking in protest. I felt claws drag across the metal above my head, gouging deep furrows. Sparks flashed where something scraped across the roof's corner. Simeon stood in the truck bed to fire again. He didn't get the chance. One green arm swept across his position and struck him like a club. He flew off the truck and into the grass beyond the barrier, landing with a sickening thud. The shotgun clattered across the tarmac. "Simeon!" Pearl screamed. "We can't stop!" Harlan yelled back, his voice breaking. But if we left him, he was dead. And if we stayed, we might all die. The creature shifted on the roof, preparing to drop into the truck bed again. Wade reached through the rear window and grabbed the flare gun Harlan had set on the seat after firing the first one. He aimed straight up and fired. The flare burst directly above the roof, a blinding red star that lit everything. The sudden intense light shocked the creature. It flinched violently and lost its grip, sliding backward off the truck. It hit the road behind us with a crash that cracked the tarmac. The flare's glow dimmed slowly, but lasted long enough for us to see the creature rise again. Still moving, still coming, utterly relentless. Harlan slowed only enough to turn the truck into a side ditch. We skidded through tall grass, bounced violently over a culvert, then ground to a halt near a break in a barbed wire fence. We go on foot, Harlan said, his breathing ragged. We get Simeon, then we make for the main road. There'll be people, lights, help. We survive by staying together. Wade took his pistol and grabbed a handful of shotgun shells scattered from Simeon's vest. Pearl clutched her ledger as though it were a talisman. I grabbed the shotgun from where it had fallen on the road and checked it quickly. One shell remaining. We ran back toward where Simeon had landed, our boots pounding on tarmac. The night behind us shuddered with the sound of something large moving through vegetation, pushing aside obstacles that would stop a man cold. It wasn't sprinting. It wasn't struggling. It was following with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. There, Pearl pointed. Simeon was sitting up, dazed, one arm wrapped around his ribs. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye. Can you move? I asked, kneeling beside him. He nodded once, teeth clenched. Ribs broken, I think. But I'll run. We pulled him to his feet. He swayed but stayed upright. The vegetation behind us rustled and crashed. Something enormous straightening branches we'd bent, pushing through undergrowth that would entangle a human. Lights ahead, Pearl said. Houses. We jogged unevenly toward them, supporting Simeon between us. Every shadow twitching at the periphery of my vision made me flinch. My throat tasted metallic from exertion and fear. My legs fell hollow, but kept moving through sheer will. The gravel gave way to a paved driveway. Porch lights glowed warm across yards, promising safety and civilization. A dog barked from somewhere close, a normal sound, a human sound. We turned into the nearest garden. Wade banged on the door with his fist. Help, he yelled. Call the police. Now. The porch light flickered once, twice, then went out. Every house light on the entire street dimmed simultaneously, then died completely, as though someone had thrown a master switch. Darkness fell like a curtain over everything. It's here, Simeon said, clutching his ribs. How did it? Wade began. Glass shattered across the street. A metal rubbish bin flew into the road, dented from what must have been an enormous impact. We heard water dripping. Not rain, not from a hose, but dripping from scales on a pavement. Somewhere very close. Harlan pointed down the street. The church has a backup generator. We make for there. We ran again, past dark houses, down the center of the tarmac. My breath rasped loud in my ears, every muscle protesting, but fear drove me harder than pain ever could. Halfway there, Simeon stumbled badly. I caught his arm and pulled him upright. Wade glanced back and froze mid-step. Red eyes stood in the intersection behind us, perhaps 50 yards distant. Not moving, just watching, measuring our pace, our distance, our desperation. Its chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of the tide. We turned the next corner and saw the church. Small brick structure, white steeple, a single light flickering weakly above the entrance. Still alive, still offering sanctuary. We sprinted the final distance. The church door was unlocked, thank God. Pearl yanked it open, and we poured inside. Harlan slammed it shut and threw the deadbolt. Wade immediately began stacking pews against it, creating a barricade. Simeon sagged into a seat, breathing in shallow gasps. The generator buzzed somewhere in the back of the building, powering dim hallway lights. The air inside smelled of old hymnals, furniture polish, and dust, the scent of 1,000 quiet Sundays. Silence outside. No footsteps. No wood splintering. No demonstration of overwhelming force. Just waiting. Pearl stood near the front window, peering carefully through the blinds. "It knows we're in here," she whispered, "but it doesn't test the walls like it tested wood. Perhaps it knows these are stronger." "Then we stay until dawn," Wade said. "The police will drive past eventually. Someone will notice." "Unless the roads are blocked," Simeon interrupted. "It moves trees like kindling. It could seal us in here." Harlan rested his forehead against a pew, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "We need a plan." I listened, not to our breathing or our whispered fears, but to the quality of silence outside. The swamp wasn't just a place anymore. It had come with us, carried on scales, and in the cold intelligence behind those red eyes. The silence had weight, like a mind thinking, considering options, making decisions. "We can't hide forever," I said aloud. "It came out of the swamp for us. It'll stay until it decides what we are, prey, threat, or something else." "What do we do then?" Wade asked. I checked the single remaining shell in the shotgun. "We finish what we started. We end this properly." Simeon shook his head slowly. "You saw it shrug off 2 shotgun blasts at close range. That won't stop it." "No," I agreed, "but it reacted to light. Fire made it drop from the truck. Perhaps it hates heat. Perhaps fire is the answer." Pearl lifted her chin, understanding dawning in her eyes. "The church has lamp oil, candles in the supply cupboard, cleaning fluids in the back." Harlan stood, determination replacing exhaustion in his weathered face. "We make a wall of fire between us and the swamp. Force it back to where it belongs. And if it comes through anyway," Wade asked, his voice tight. "Then we keep it here," Pearl answered, "where others can see proof of what happened, where it doesn't choose the ground." Outside, gravel shifted under enormous weight. The church wall creaked ominously. Red eyes appeared at the window, close enough that I could see my own reflection in those alien pupils. We readied ourselves for what would come next. The door flexed inward. The stacked pews scraped across the old wooden floor, moving an inch despite their combined weight. Dust drifted down from the rafters. The deadbolt groaned as screws began pulling free from wood that had held them for decades. Harlan gripped the flare gun with both hands, ready to fire his last round. "Pearl, show me that supply cupboard." She pointed down the side corridor. I followed them both, leaving Wade and Simeon braced at the entrance. The hallway smelled of bleach and candle wax. A corkboard displayed children's Sunday school drawings. They fluttered with each impact against the door, innocent pictures of rainbows and crosses and smiling families. We found the supply cupboard. Inside sat bottles of lamp oil, 3 large jugs of industrial cleaning solvent, stacks of white candles, and a wooden crate filled with old paperback hymnals. Harlan grabbed 2 jugs. I took the candles and the crate. Pearl carried 2 more jugs, her knuckles white from the strain of their weight. Another massive shove hit the door. Wade grunted as he pressed his shoulder harder into the pew. "It knows we're slowing down," he called out. "It's waiting for us to tire." "We're not giving it time," Harlan answered grimly. We worked quickly. We lined the pews with the old hymnals, their thin paper perfect kindling. We soaked everything with lamp oil until the fumes burned my throat and made my eyes water. Pearl set candles along the window sills with practiced, steady hands, striking matches one after another. The flames flickered, small but defiant points of light in the darkness. Simeon took the shotgun again, holding the barrel low despite his injured ribs. "1 shell," he said. "Make it count." "It's not for the creature," I replied. "It's for the fuel line. We blast the oil when it steps through. Turn this place into an inferno." Wade nodded understanding. "Trap it inside the fire." Pearl looked toward the stained glass panels at the front of the church. "Fire will spread quickly in here. The entire building will go up." "It will," Harlan acknowledged. "But if we don't stop it here, it will keep following us. And after us, it might follow anyone else it encounters. We end this tonight." Another impact. The pew legs scraped across the floor, moving almost a foot this time. The deadbolt bent visibly. Screws popped free with sharp pinging sounds. A thin line of moonlight cut through where the doorframe had begun to split. "Now," Harlan said, "it's time." We moved back, giving the creature room to enter, creating killing ground. Pearl stood near the lectern, eyes steady and clear. Wade held his pistol low, hands no longer shaking. Simeon and I flanked the center aisle. Harlan waited behind us with the flare gun aimed at the oil-soaked hymnals. The doors smashed inward with a splintering crash. The pews toppled, then were shoved aside as though they weighed nothing at all. The creature stepped over the wreckage, its shoulders nearly brushing the doorframe. Scales glistened in the candlelight. Water dripped from its elbows onto the church floor, each drop making a soft pattering sound. It tilted its head, looking at each of us in turn, not with wild hunger, but with focused intention, careful evaluation. We weren't prey. We were something else, something it needed to understand before making its next move. "You don't belong here," Pearl said, her voice remarkably steady. The creature's chest expanded as it drew a long, deep breath, muscles rippling beneath scales. A sign it was preparing to move, to strike, to end this confrontation on its own terms. "Now!" I shouted. Simeon raised the shotgun in one fluid motion. The creature shifted, beginning its charge. He fired at the oil-soaked hymnals. The blast ignited them instantly. Flame raced across the pews in a fast-moving line, climbing up the paper and racing toward the doorway in a wall of orange heat. The creature recoiled from the sudden heat, stumbling one step backward, the first time we'd seen it retreat from anything. Wade fired his pistol into the nearest jug of solvent. The container exploded, liquid spraying directly into the flames. The fire expanded outward with a roar, heat punching up the walls with frightening speed. The creature hissed, a harsh, angry release of air through passages not meant for such sounds. It raised one arm to shield its eyes from the intensity. The scales didn't burn like skin would, but they contracted visibly under the heat, edges drying and curling slightly. Harlan fired the flare gun directly into the center of the growing blaze. The bright red burst filled the entire sanctuary with light and heat. Curtains near the windows caught fire immediately. The flames surged toward the ceiling, painting the old wooden beams with dancing orange light. Heat struck my face hard enough to force tears from my eyes. The creature backed toward the entrance, not defeated, but clearly unwilling to pass through the wall of fire we'd created. It turned and shoved through the doorway, boards cracking and splintering around its bulk. It stepped into the yard outside, its chest rising and falling rapidly now, breath visible as vapor in the shifting shadows cast by the firelight. We moved with it, refusing to let it disappear into darkness. The fire behind us roared louder, forcing us to evacuate. Sparks followed us like angry insects seeking revenge. Outside, moonlight washed the road in pale silver. The creature stood near the gravel path, framed by dancing embers and smoke, its scales reflecting the orange glow of the burning church. It turned its head toward the swamp beyond the houses, toward the dark wilderness where it had come from, toward the life and territory it understood. Harlan stepped forward 2 deliberate paces. "Go," he said firmly, "and don't follow us again." The creature looked back at us one final time. It blinked slowly, once, twice, a measurement taken, a decision reached, an agreement perhaps made. Then it turned with economical grace and walked into the darkness between 2 houses. Water dripped from its hands onto the gravel, each drop hissing as it struck stones still warm from the day's heat. It crossed the gap, shoulders brushing against siding. Shrubs bent aside with barely a sound. A chained dog barked once sharply, then fell silent, whimpering. The swamp swallowed it completely. We stood motionless, watching until even the smallest leaf stopped rustling, until every shadow settled back into place. Then we turned toward the church. The roof crackled, smoke boiling out through the steeple vents in thick black columns. Flames licked through every window, curling in bright sheets that illuminated the entire street. The porch rail collapsed with a groaning crash, sending up a shower of sparks. The fire consumed everything we'd used to trap the creature. Pews, hymnals, oil, history itself burning away into ash and memory. "We should call the fire brigade," Wade said quietly. Harlan nodded. "And the police." Pearl nodded as well, though she looked exhausted beyond measure. We tell them what we saw. Simeon wiped sweat and blood from his brow, then touched his injured ribs gingerly. They'll think we've lost our minds. Perhaps, I said, but something will remain. I pointed at the wet prints drying slowly on the gravel path. 3 wide toes, deeply impressed, utterly unmistakable. Someone else will see those before the night is over. Physical evidence doesn't lie. Harlan stared at the burning church, flames reflecting in his tired eyes. We've cost ourselves the buyer and the sale. We've cost this town a piece of its history and peace. But that thing knows now, Pearl said. Fire can stop it. People can push it back into the wild where it belongs. She closed her ledger carefully, as though marking the end of something significant. Perhaps it never wanted us dead, she continued. It watched us plenty of times without attacking. But when we stepped into its territory, it chose to test us, to understand us. We've shown it that this world, these roads, these houses, this land belongs to people, and we'll defend it. We gathered around the damaged truck in silence, waiting. The fire engines would arrive soon. Their sirens would carry far into the swamp, announcing human presence and response, warning anything that listened that this territory was claimed and defended. Wade kept his eyes fixed on the dark line of trees at the street's edge. Do you reckon it's gone for good? I listened carefully to the night, waiting for that unnatural silence, for the sound of breathing, for scales sliding against mud. Instead, I heard frogs starting up again in the distance, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Crickets joined their chorus gradually, filling the air with normal night sounds. It's still out there, I said honestly. It knows we live here now, and we know it's real. We know what watches from the water when the moon is dark and the swamp grows quiet. Simeon checked the last remaining shell in his vest pocket, wincing at the pain the movement caused his broken ribs. Then we stay ready. We stay prepared. Harlan looked down the long stretch of road leading back toward Bishopville, toward electric lights and locked doors and the illusion of safety. We never speak of this like some tourist tale, he said. We speak of it only when necessary, only when truth serves a purpose. Pearl lifted her chin. Folklore grows from fear, but truth keeps fear honest. Truth gives us power over the unknown. Behind us, the church roof caved inward with a tremendous crash, sending a column of sparks spiraling high into the night sky. The old building that had stood for nearly a century was gone, sacrificed to stop something far older than brick and mortar and human faith. We didn't run anymore. We walked steadily toward the town lights with fire at our backs, and smoke in our lungs, and a certain knowledge of what watches from dark water. If the lizard man ever returns, if it ever decides to test humanity's borders again, it won't find us ignorant. It won't find us unprepared. It won't find us easy prey. It will remember this night, and so will we. The moonshine crates still sat in the damaged truck bed, most of the jars miraculously intact despite everything. We'd lost the buyer, lost the sale, and very nearly lost our lives. But we'd gained something else, the kind of knowledge that comes only through survival, through facing something that shouldn't exist and living to speak of it. As the first fire engine siren began wailing in the distance, cutting through the night like a clarion call, I realized that the swamp had taught us something fundamental. We share this world with things we don't understand, things that don't fit into neat categories or scientific classifications. The question isn't whether such things exist. The question is what we do when we encounter them. We chose to stand our ground. We chose to fight with fire and determination and the stubborn human refusal to yield our territory without a battle. The lizard man had tested us, measured us, learned about us, and we, in turn, had learned about it. The standoff wasn't over, merely paused. An understanding had been reached in fire and blood and fear. The swamp had its territory, and we had ours. The boundaries were clear now, marked in ash and memory, and the tracks slowly fading from the gravel. Neither side had truly won, but neither had we lost, and perhaps that was enough.